The inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Can you commit to us tonight that you will not work to privatize public schools or cut a single penny from public education?
I look forward, if confirmed, to working with you to talk about how we address the needs of all parents and all students. And we acknowledge today that not all schools are working for the students that are assigned to them.
The Senate hearings for Betsy DeVos have been contentious, both inside the chamber and in cities across the nation, including Cincinnati, where public school teachers made their sentiments heard 10 days ago. Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. I'm Dan Hurley. Historically, public schools have been one of the distinctive institutions created by America. Public schools have been understood as the primary force providing vertical mobility for children born in modest means. Universities hold up the number of first-generation students they educate as proof that upward mobility is still possible. Internationally, we promote our system of universal public education as a foundation stone of U.S.-style democracy. The nomination of Betsy DeVos, a committed advocate of charter schools and a critic of traditional public schools, in combination with the sweeping dismissal of the effectiveness of public schools by President Trump in his inaugural, has raised a great deal of concern about the assumptions underpinning education policy over the next 4 years. To discuss the ways local educators are reading the signals of the new administration, I am joined this morning by Julie Sellers, the president of the Cincinnati Federation of Teachers. She began her teaching career in 1990 with Cincinnati Public Schools. And Ramon Davenport, the principal at Dawn Community High School, a charter school in Walnut Hills. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you for that.
Welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Julie, good to have you back. Ramon, Betsy DeVos has been an active proponent of charter schools. You lead a charter school. Dawn is one of the older ones that have been here in Cincinnati. What do you think of her as the head of the education department? How do you view this particular development?
I mean, I view it in a positive sense. Let me just say that. We've been talking about charter schools forever. You know, people come up, you know, and say, hey, you know, charter schools should exist. And then you got a few people that say charter schools shouldn't exist. You know, I'm an advocate absolutely for charter schools because it gives us the option to be able to educate kids when nobody else seems to be able to educate those students.
So what is the mission of Dawn Community High School at this point? Who are you educating?
We're educating at-risk students. We're educating students who have been in traditional public schools. They just, for whatever reason, they couldn't get it done. A lot of it is self-inflicted, but you know, students, we deal with students who basically come to us, they're behind in grade level, and we take those kids in and we educate those kids the best way we know how. A lot of individual help and different things that they need to succeed in the society.
And how many students are there?
We have right around about 540 students right now.
Okay. Julie, what's your view of the implications of Betsy DeVos becoming the Secretary of Education?
Well, I have many concerns. As you know, more than 90% of the children in America attend public schools. I have concerns on what they are going to do with the funding that the U.S. Department of Education has control over. And people may not understand that is where the funding comes for IDEA-B, which is...
Wait a minute, what's that?
Okay, that is the funding for children with disabilities. And as you know, that there are many costs incurred because of the services that are necessary for those students.
And this became a particular issue because when she was asked about this, she didn't seem to really know that that was a federal program.
Exactly. She was unaware that it was a federal program. She said take it back to the states, but it is it's federally funded, and it is also has federal oversight, and that way it gives continuity from state to state. So if you have a special needs that you have to have accommodations for, those, and you live in Ohio or you live in Alabama, you would have access to those same types of services.
Let's be clear. Most funding for public schools comes from the state. and localities.
That's right.
So charter schools are public schools in the sense
Yes.
that these are public funds.
That's right.
They are local state funds that come to you.
Absolutely.
How, do you get federal dollars?
No, we everything is state funded. We don't get any other type of funding.
What would happen with students with disabilities, for example? Can you tap into those federal funds?
No, in a sense, no. We have to educate students with the budget that we're allotted. So we get so much money per student, and we have to use those dollars, for resources. And sometimes, in most cases, that's not enough to be able to educate students, who are special ed students. So, we do our best.
This is exactly one of the issues that with special ed or students with a variety of disabilities, it wouldn't have to necessarily be special ed, but that it's the public schools who end up with the responsibility for this, and often overlooked, very costly.
It is very costly. For example, we have children in our schools who have medical needs where there has to be a nurse on standby for that student. There are children who go to school with special transportation, which comes out of that type of funding.
What about other federal funding that comes into public education locally? For example, Title I, right?
Title I, Title IX. So those title dollars, and I know those dollars even go to charter and parochial. Those funds would probably be at stake or at risk of having cuts. We don't know that. And the really difficult thing for districts is they have to do their staffing for schools and develop their budgets now for next year. And sometimes we don't even know what the state or federal funding is until after halfway through the next school year. So it's really difficult when you don't know really exactly what your funding is to develop your budget.
I want to play a short segment out of President Trump's inaugural address on January the 20th, where he spoke about education in America. Let's take a listen.
An education system flush with cash, but which leaves our young and beautiful students deprived of all knowledge.
Either one of you, what's your reaction to that?
I don't know any district in America that is flush with cash. I think everybody is trying to do more with less money. I think that he is totally wrong when he says children are being failed by the system. The graduation rates in America are higher now than they've ever been in the history of the United States. CPS's graduation rates here in Cincinnati are higher than they've been for a really long time, probably ever. The good old days are sometimes looked at as something wonderful, but there were problems at that time too.
Well, as a historian, I could talk to you about all day about
that.
What's your reaction to the president's comment?
Well, I look at it like this. The reason why charter schools are even around is because at some point parents felt that there is a need to go out and look for something more alternative. When you look at district schools, I'm an advocate for traditional public schools as well because I'm a product of it. But when you look at sometimes in traditional public schools, it's overcrowded classrooms and the numbers are real high in each individual classroom. So when parents look at that, they feel like charter schools would be the best choice to educate their kids. So I don't agree with President Trump basically saying that that schools are strapped with a lot of cash, and I'm just giving you kind of a personal feeling because we can never set our budgets. There's no way we can set our budgets or have a salary scale in the charter school because you never know from year to year what your enrollment is going to be.
Sort of the same thing that Julie
Absolutely.
was just saying.
Absolutely.
Sometimes I wonder when people rail against public schools, whether they're really talking about public schools in general, universally, or they're talking about center cities schools are suburban schools that serve very low-income students,
Right.
and that this is all really about a criticism not so much of public schools, but not wanting to deal with the challenges that are public school teachers in center cities, and that would include both of you
Right,
face.
absolutely.
What do you think about that?
I absolutely agree that when you look at test scores, they mirror the socioeconomics of that child. I don't think that President Trump or even Betsy DeVos would have any understanding of what it takes to educate a child who's living in poverty, the stress that those children live with, and the supports that those children need in order to be successful. In Cincinnati, we do have a lot of our title funds. We have reading specialists in every one of our title schools, and we had 97% of our children who were promotable to the 4th grade for reading. It worries me that if those funds are cut, what will be the funds that will help those children so that they can be successful?
Another twist on this, and this would be different for the two of you,
Right.
is that to what extent do you think the attack on schools is an attack on teachers, organized, unionized teachers? Because in the charter system doesn't use.
That's right.
And part of the whole reason it was set up was
That's
to
right.
avoid the unions.
That's right.
But the unions are very strong, generally speaking, for Democratic candidates, Democratic Party. To what extent is this a partisan issue?
I believe it's a strong partisan issue.
Yeah.
I believe that they see teachers as a voting bloc, and they want to make sure that they control that. I know that there are more and more charter schools across this country who are unionizing. I do know that districts and states that have collective bargaining where teachers can negotiate what the learning conditions are for children, those schools are more successful. The top performing states in this country are unionized states with collective bargaining. The bottom states are right-to-work states where they don't have collective bargaining rights. And teachers have to become the advocates for their children to have the right learning conditions, because if it comes down to money, we already know, John Husted, the auditor of the state, has said, we can balance our budget, just make larger class sizes. That is not what the public in Cincinnati
This is
wants.
what you were just talking about.
And that is not what is wanted by any parent across the country.
I'm basically out of time, but I have
Okay.
one really quick question.
Okay.
I'd ask both of you to, and Ramon, for you, if Betsy DeVos is approved and confirmed by the Senate, what's your biggest hope? What do you hope will come from this?
I hope that they are able to at least get a crash course in how to educate students who are in poverty, students who basically need second and third chances out here. I hope that they're able to do that, because it will help tremendously, especially I'm just giving you from the charter school world.
Okay. And Julie, what's your biggest fear?
My biggest fear is that the funding could be cut and it could hurt many children, and children across the country will lose services and become victims of those cuts before we can get it turned around.
Thank you very much for being here.
We
This is
appreciate it.
not
Thank
this
you.
is not going to go away, so maybe we have you back.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Keep
great.
talking
Thank
about
you.
this development. Stay tuned. After the break, I'll be joined by a young woman headed for medical school who currently depends on the Affordable Care Act and worries about what will replace it. Welcome back. Top on the list of President Trump and Republican-controlled Congress is the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. President Trump has promised a smooth, rapid transition to another, better system. Some congressional leaders have promised a replacement system, but have not offered specifics. Some Republican leaders, like Kentucky Governor Matt Bevin, have urged Congress to completely repeal ACA and put nothing in its place. It is important to grapple with the big policy issues on health care, but it is also essential to remember that policy ultimately translates into the lives of individual people. I'm joined this morning by someone for whom the ACA has been critical, not only in the narrow sense of delivering vital medical services, but in a larger sense of preserving the opportunity for a career in medicine. Emma Khalsa graduated from Boston University in 2013. Shortly after beginning medical school that fall, she was T-boned by another driver. Her injuries required 2 major surgeries. Ms. Khalsa returned to Cincinnati to recover with her family and got medical coverage because of the Medicaid extension of in Ohio, part of the Affordable Care Act. After a long recovery and some rehab, she is scheduled to restart medical school this fall. Emma, welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's start with just a little bit, without getting into all the details, of your personal situation. Sure. How serious was this accident? What kind of surgeries and expenses were involved in this?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. So it's a 2-year saga, so I'm not going to go into every detail, but it ultimately ended with, it was 2 cervical spine neurosurgeries, the second of which was much more extensive because my 4 levels of my cervical and then my thoracic spine had been compromised with disc herniations, and so the neurosurgeon I had in New York, wonderful neurosurgeon, saved my life, frankly, by performing a 4-level disc fusion with titanium to replace the structural integrity of my neck. So it was an extensive, honestly, very painful 2 years. A lot of it I was in bed or needing pretty full-time care, and for a very, very long time, medical school, anything of that nature even, really wasn't on the horizon for me.
And what kind of, were you on a insurance policy at that point?
Yeah,
did you have insurance?
Yeah, so thanks so much for asking. So when I was in New York, I was actually in medical school. I had started, this happened 5 weeks into medical school, so I was on the I was on New York Medical College's insurance plan. Mm-hmm. However, when I got so sick, I did return home to Cincinnati. This is where my family is, and I couldn't obviously afford all the expenses. And so when I moved to Ohio, I was really very grateful and was placed on through the Ohio Medicaid expansion. I was able to get coverage, and that has proven to transform my life, frankly, because not only would I be buried with debt, but I wouldn't be sitting in front of you saying that next year I'm going to medical school and whatever else the future holds.
So that involved lots of continuous care, rehab, etc. Will you have, in the long term, will you have ongoing medical issues?
So those are both great questions. So ever since, so one of the things that's been so important about having the Ohio Medicaid for me is that because of the extensive surgery, because of the extent of my injuries, my doctors want me to be checking in with them very regularly. So I see my primary care doctor at least once a month, often twice a month. I also have a spinal specialist. I have physical therapists. So as you can imagine, that would add up incredibly quickly. I'm very lucky, and the truth is, yes, I am going to need care for the rest of my life. Not as extensive. I'm officially 1 year out from my most extensive, the second surgery, which was the more extensive one. So moving forward, my physical therapy hopefully will diminish things of that nature. Sorry, go ahead.
No. Medicaid is, in effect, a single payer policy plan, right. Where more like Canada and the rest of the developed world uses. We're the only one who uses this system.
Exactly.
How's the care been?
Well, the care has been fantastic. I go to a public health clinic, and my primary care is absolutely amazing. I see a spinal specialist at Christ Hospital. They take the Ohio Medicaid. My care has been excellent. So
you don't see a serious downgrading of care because you're on Medicaid?
I don't feel at all like I'm being I'm so sorry, I can't think of the word, yeah, I get the same level of care that I think anyone would get walking in.
Okay. Yeah, and that's what I was sort of looking for, to see if that was the case. If the ACA is repealed, and I think we can all assume that it's going to be, just the way things are going.
Yeah.
So the question is when. What is it from your perspective, both as someone who's experienced the current system, benefited from it, and someone who's going to have a career in medicine, what would you say needs to be in whatever new system exists?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question, and I guess my very first answer would be that I think that it is beyond irresponsible for them to repeal it until they have a replacement plan. And obviously, this isn't a huge area of interest for me. And the CBO, which is a nonpartisan congressional budget office, I
yes.
believe, did a study that said that if the ACA is repealed without replacement, it will take healthcare from 27 million people. And Senator Paul Ryan did respond by saying, well, those numbers, we can't, those numbers are irrelevant because that doesn't take into account what the replacement is. But I feel like they need to come forward with a replacement.
So what would you say
Sure.
you would want to see in a replacement?
So I would say a few of the minimums would be probably the most important, coverage even for those with pre-existing conditions. Because one of the things I've learned to be the hardest is that when you already are sick, it doesn't usually get better. You usually get sicker until you can get some help. So not being able to get insurance when you need it most is truly, in my opinion.
So in your situation, you will always have a pre-existing condition from this point on, right? So if this goes away and that guarantee goes away,
exactly.
You won't be able to get.
This happened when I was 24 years old. So from 24 on, I will have had a pre-existing condition.
Okay.
So that's one of the most important, in my opinion. Another is lifetime, caps on coverage. I unfortunately, as I've mentioned, had 2 neurosurgeries. One of them alone, I received the bill, still working through the insurance and all that, but it was $600,000.
For one?
For the second neurosurgery, yes. And that, I don't know how someone comes away, I don't understand how someone can come out from that much debt. Mm-hmm. So for me, that would be another really important one.
So that if insurance is available, it shouldn't have a cap.
Yes.
Which is
yes.
under the ACA. That is the situation.
Exactly.
Okay.
Currently.
Anything else? Are those the two?
Honestly, I could go on and on. I think that it's a very, I like the policy where people stay on their parents' insurance till they're 26. Often, as the marketplace is hard for everyone right now to find a job, so maybe it's no harder than it for a 26-year-old, but it is. I think that it's right now that's a really good one, and even President Trump has mentioned keeping that one. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No. There's a letter that is out there that Senator Portman wrote to a constituent who asked about this. And actually, he said he supports, and here's some of the things, but he supports these various things that you have mentioned, and some others. He wants competition across lines for insurance companies. There's all the funding sorts of things. If you were able to sit down with Senator Portman, what would you say to him?
Well, I would say to Senator Portman and also to Governor Kasich and also to our President, Donald Trump, that you are our elected officials and you are our public servants, and thank you for being our public servants. And please serve us. Please take a moment to consider my story or the story of those who are much more unfortunate than I am. I had a family to fall back on. Many people do not. I would urge you to take a moment, think about that, and then there are a lot of things that we can't agree on. There are party lines on all sorts of issues, and the country's divided on so many things, but can't we all come together on this basic human right of health care?
Thank you very much for sharing your story. Good luck in medical school.
Thank you.
And another question I don't have time to ask you is how this experience is going to change you as a doctor forever.
Yeah.
And I think I have some sense of that. Good luck. Thank you for making Newsmakers part of your Sunday morning. Next week, I'll be rejoined by for the entire show by Cincinnati Mayor John Cranley, along with the interviews of Rob Richardson Jr. and Yvette Simpson earlier this month, which are available online. Just Google Local 12 Newsmakers. This will complete the one-on-one series of interviews for the declared candidates for mayor. Have a good week.